Hey y'all, welcome to our Stories from the Field webinar, Rats, Cute Pets, which I had to put in there because of a dear friend, but also Terrible Pests, which I also had to put in there because of some dear friends. And this presentation is generously supported by the Food and Drug Administration. I'm Billy Mitchell from the National Farmers Union Local Food Safety Collaborative. And if you joined us for some of these future webinars, you already know the answers to the next couple questions. But just in case you haven't, you might be asking yourself, what's the National Farmers Union? And the National Farmers Union is a grassroots, producer-driven organization that believes strong agriculture is the basis for thriving communities. Like I said, Billy Mitchell, National Farmers Union, Local Food Safety Collaborative. So your next question might be, what's the Local Food Safety Collaborative? It's a cooperative agreement between the National Farmers Union Foundation and the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. Provides outreach, education, and training to small fruit and vegetable growers and processors on the Food Safety Modernization Act, otherwise known as FSMA. And we're lucky to work with a network of partners around the country implementing food safety projects and expanding reach. And today, y'all, we've got some all-stars. So I'll wrap up these introductions, and then we'll be joined by Nobi from the Good Samaritan Farm in Atlanta, Georgia. After that, Chris Callahan, Extension Associate Professor of Agricultural Engineering at the University of Vermont, and Yolanda Gonzalez, Urban Agriculture Specialist with Cornell Cooperative Extension, will be teaming up to provide some information about rats, strategies to control rats, a little information about cats, and just like good old-fashioned know-how. And they're really going to be looking for some active, engaged audience participation. So I'm looking forward to seeing what everybody shares in the chat box. So usually we'll do introductions now, but we'll wait till when Chris and Yolanda get going. After their presentation, we'll have a nice amount of time, about 15 minutes, to do some Q&A. Then we'll wrap up. We'll say thank you, and we'll see you all in about a month. And so our first presenter is Nobi from the Good Samaritan Farm, beautiful vegetable farm in Atlanta, Georgia. They provided me with this incredible drone shot. You can see this is a gorgeous farm. It is also right in the heart of Atlanta. And if anybody's ever lived in a big city, you know there are rats, there are rodents. And so today, Nobi's going to talk to us about their experiences. So Nobi, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if you will, say hello so we know that your audio works.
Yeah, hello.
Way
Maybe
cool.
more. It works.
It works. Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay, good.
So first, if you'll tell us a little bit about your farm. So I said it's in Atlanta, but what surrounds your farm? What does your farm look like?
Oh no. Maybe my connection here.
Oh gosh, Nobi, it is. Well, Trisha, confirm for me
Okay.
whose connection is rough, my connection or Nobody's connection?
I believe it is Nobi's. Nobi, it might be helpful to go off camera.
Y'all, some things stay great about Zoom and some things stay frustrating. So Chris and Yolanda, this is maybe your 1 minute warning that we might push up your presentation a little bit.
No worries.
Yeah, it's fine.
All right, Nobi, if you can hear me, I think what we'll do is we'll have Chris and Yolanda go first. And hopefully maybe you can hang up, call back up again. We'll get those connection issues sorted out. So Chris and Yolanda, thanks for thinking on your feet. Thanks for always being ready to engage and teach. And we'll pass the mic to y'all, and hopefully we'll get Nobi back in a couple of minutes.
Oh,
Cool.
she entered the waiting room.
Just while we're waiting, I'll need host privileges to share our presentation if and when we get to that.
All right, Chris, you should be a co-host.
Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry. I
Nobody's
think I
back. Good.
had Wi-Fi issues. So.
All right, way cool. Okay, Nobi,
Okay.
we'll do our best. If you'll just tell us a
Okay.
little bit about the area that surrounds your farm in
Yeah.
Atlanta.
Sure. So the farm in Atlanta is an acre of property attached to a health center that is in the Bankhead neighborhood of Atlanta, Georgia. So if you're familiar with Atlanta City, about 2 miles away from where we are, we're on the west side of Atlanta, and we are in what is considered a food forest and a low income neighborhood. So the clinic serves to combat the issues that the demographic are facing in that area. And one of those challenges is food access, and not just food access, but affordable quality health food. So everything that we grow on the farm, we sell right on location at the clinic, making it easily accessible to not just the patients, but anyone who lives in the neighborhood. And we also provide subsidized pricing so that it meets that affordable need that is there.
Very cool. And will you tell us a little bit about the things that you're growing on the farm?
Yeah. So we're getting into the fall season. So we're about to start growing a lot of our, fun root crops, I think, like your turnips, carrots, radishes. We have our sweet potatoes are growing. We are harvesting their leaves while we're waiting for the tubers to mature. We have new bush beans growing. We have tomatoes and peppers are in full swing right now, eggplant. We're about to start seeding up transplanting soon all of our greens, like our collards, kales. And I'm sure there is something that I'm missing. It's that transition season. You forget what's coming and kind of going. But we do a lot of variety. I'd say we about 35 different crops throughout the year.
Thank you. So you mentioned sweet potatoes, which was part of the reason I was interested in talking to you all today, because I know that you all grow amazing, beautiful sweet potatoes, but I also know that that's where the rat problems have kind of been in the past.
Yeah.
So just so folks know, it might get a little gross in a second, but can you talk to us about some of your past rat and rodent issues on the farm?
Yeah, absolutely. When I began working at the farm 5 years ago, that it was about this time of year. So it was getting close to the time to start harvesting the sweet potatoes. That's when I got introduced to our rat problem on the farm. And as Cody and I, the old farm manager, were going into harvest one day, he warned me about the rats. He knew that they were an issue. And we had seen some rat damage, because what they'll do is they will burrow into the beds themselves and live in these sweet potato beds. The greens are very dense. You can't see that they're in there, and they just make it their home for the season. And so one day we were in there harvesting, and I took the digging fork and I stuck it into the bed and outshot a rat from the bed. And we watched it run and hop down the bed. And after we kind of recovered from a mixture of laughter and shock and feeling gross, I promise you, Cody went and stuck another digging fork into the ground, and another rat shot up out of the sweet potato bed. And it was that year specifically, we lost close to half of our sweet potato crop to rats.
That is terrifying. And when you say you lost
Yeah.
them to rats, they're biting a chunk out of it. What's happening when you're losing your
It's a
crop to rats?
mixture. It's a mixture. You'll grab some, pull some of the sweet potato out, and you'll see a couple of nibble marks on. And then it's just they chomped off the whole end of the sweet potato. And we got to the point where we were just calling them rat potatoes. Like, these are good potatoes, these are your rat potatoes. So yeah, it was a mixture of just, a bite here and then a chunk out from the other ones.
That is awful and super gross.
Yeah, discouraging too, because it felt overwhelming, because by that time the damage was done. There's nothing you could do prevention wise. So
Right, yeah, once a rat takes a bite out of it, it's got to go for sure.
Yeah.
And so you had said that was 5 years ago, and so I know over the past 5 years things have gotten better. So can you explain what it's like today and what you think might be happening?
Yeah, sure. So say it was last year for sure, we didn't notice any rat damage. Maybe there was one in the ground that we left, but everything we pulled out, we didn't see any rat damage. The year before, made like a few, but it over the last couple of years, it's significantly changed. And it just has been a non-issue. We aren't even seeing the rat holes anymore. And we think that, we didn't do like an official study, or I don't have a form of measurement. So it is this all an assumption, that I think a few things have happened. One is the diversity in predators on the farm has increased. So you see a lot, there's a hawk that is on the farm every day. And we have literally watched him sitting on the telephone pole, swoop down into the kudzu and grab it was a small rodent, so I'm not sure what it was, but it was like he had vision through the kudzu and could grab it out and flew off with it, and that was his lunch. And he's out there every day. We also have plenty of rat snakes. We see full-grown 10-foot long rat snakes on the farm. We'll be in the wood chips digging through them, and we'll come across what, like, it's really gross, but it's a cluster of snakes, and we just kind of move and let them be. And so by not disturbing them and encouraging that habitat, we believe that we're seeing over the years an increase of snakes on the farm. And then we also have stray cats in the area that we know that there's a man who lives in a tent down behind the farm, and that he feeds cats, and he is an encourager of the cats. And over the years, we've really been seeing an increase of them. You'll see them kind of walking along the skirts of the farm. And we just assume that their increase in presence probably has an increase in why the population of the rats have gone down. And then I also realized that we no longer use plant skid, which is a blood-based deterrent for rabbits. And the mixture of plant skid, it smells awful, but the rats do love it. And I just honestly stopped using it, mainly because the smell was so bad I couldn't handle it anymore. And I think that could be a contributor too, maybe by switching up our using more net coverings instead of the plant skid to deter rats. And then also we used to have 2 junkyards on either side of us, and those junkyards are no longer there. So development of the area maybe too. So
Very cool. And I mean, and Chris and Yolanda will get into this, because we can't all rely on hawks or potentially some guy down the road with cats. And there are certainly some food safety risks that can come with cats. Looking back to 5 years ago, and that first time you put the broad fork into the sweet potatoes and the rats exploded out of there, what do you wish you knew about rats and rodents, maybe before you started farming?
That's a good question. Because I don't think I really knew to expect that coming into, ironically, into urban ag. I mean, it makes sense, but I was new to agriculture. I didn't know to think about it. I think maybe knowing more telltale signs of like, what are indicators of rats are starting to move into your sweet potato beds, so that maybe we could have gotten a head start on prevention. And what are some more effective preventatives aside from the accidental cats that might be roaming around the area? Because I do think that our issue has been by chance and by luck on our end. It maybe not so much stuff that we've done ourselves.
Very cool. And then it might be the same exact answer, but as Chris and Yolanda are presenting, we do have a bunch of food safety educators on the call. What are some things you'd love to learn today? Or do you have any questions for this wider audience that might be able to be addressed during the Q&A section?
Yeah, absolutely. I personally would like to know, because something else that we as conscious farmers are trying to do is not contribute to waste. And so when you have rats eating them, like so much of your crop, it's just a shame to just have to throw so much of that away. So we've wondered, like, what are, if any, safe alternative, like things that we could use for the, say, like the untouched part of this. I mean, because we think about some of these sweet potatoes, like they're huge, they're very big, and to have one tooth mark cause you to have to throw the whole sweet potato out. It just seems like a shame. We even had a woman say that she would want the tainted sweet potatoes so that she could use them as dog food. So yeah, I think we would like to know what are the risks of transference of, if a bad portion of of a vegetable, because for us, like our tomatoes, for instance, if they have brown rot, we can still cut the rotting part of the tomato off and the other part is fine. You can eat that tomato. So I think that's something that we would like to know is, are there alternatives so that we could, or ways that we could use the untouched part so that we don't have to contribute so much waste. And then, with the cats, we're aware that cats are a risk to have, and you don't want to necessarily encourage them to come and be walking around in your beds. And, but we are also aware that in the city of Atlanta, there's a trap and release program where the Humane Society will, provide shots for this stray cat. So is that something that an extra step that we could take to help and, ensure that we're still being able to operate a safe garden even though these cats are there, it's out of our control for them to show up or not. So maybe that's something else we could do. We could start trying to catch the cats and get them, their shots, and maybe lower our risks some. So
Very cool. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your stories and sharing those questions. So now we'll pass the mic over to Yolanda and Chris, and then Nobi. I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that the internet stays strong, and we'll have a little Q&A with everybody at the end. And with that, Chris, Yolanda, if y'all are ready, I'm happy to pass the mic and the screen sharing.
Great. Chris, do you want to go ahead and share your screen? Okay.
You got it. Should be up now. Go ahead, Yolanda.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Yolanda Gonzalez. I'm with Cornell Cooperative Extension, Harvest, New York. We are a regional team based throughout New York State. Myself and my colleague, Sam Anderson, are based in Brooklyn, and we're the two urban ag specialists, and we work with commercial urban growers in New York City. Believe it or not, there's around 40 different operations throughout the 5 boroughs, from rooftops to in-ground and indoor CEA operations. There's a wide diversity of different urban ag systems.
And I'm Chris Callahan. I'm with University of Vermont Extension. I run the agricultural engineering program here, and I also serve as a director for the Northeast Center to Advance Food Safety. A lot of my work focuses on post-harvest handling and storage, a lot of wash pack work, and over the years has increasingly included a lot of produce safety considerations. And I just want to take a second and thank Nobi for sharing so openly about your experiences and helping me learn along the way. Thank you.
Your favorite or least favorite? I guess we can open it up.
So yeah, I don't know if I'm supposed to cover this one or you, Yolanda. Did you cover it?
I think, well, we can both kind of cover it out.
Okay.
I wanted to see what responses we got.
Yeah, great.
Oh, nobody's back.
Yeah, so everybody take a second, drop into the chat box and just let us know what your favorite or least favorite rodent might be and where you're coming from. I hope the chat box is open. There we go. So Billy has rats as both his favorite and least favorite. Pack rats. Guinea pigs. Hamsters. Buffalo voles. Ooh, that sounds interesting. That's one I'll have to look up.
Yeah. Encounter that a lot in Maine, actually.
I just read a fascinating book all about beavers in North America and their influence on the land, and it's an amazing example.
Mhm.
Great.
Okay, so I think this is you.
So a lot of what Nobi covered is it really resonates with me and in my experience working with other growers, and also in what I've learned from the literature and other educators and researchers around this challenge. And what we're hoping to cover today are just to reinforce some of the hazards that come with rats, and those are both, disease, but also product loss. To Nobi's point, it's super discouraging to lose product you've worked hard to produce and invested a lot into, and could have really beneficial impact in the world. We're going to talk a little bit about rat physiology and psychology because it really influences how we can potentially address these problems. Yolanda is going to talk a bit about integrated pest management, because a lot of the same practices that we use for other pests relate here. And so we'll get into that. And then what we wanted to wrap up with are best practices. And this is our collective work to try to boil this down into what can we actually do. And it comes from a lot of different sources. And we'll get into some of those as further reading and references. But bottom line, we're going to work to remove attractions such as food from places where we can. We're going to work to make the rats uncomfortable. This is sometimes called harassment in a positive sense, which is interesting. We're going to work to develop buildings and storage areas that actually intentionally exclude rats. So we're including some design features that keep them out. And then really, as a last resort, it's about reducing population. Baiting, trapping, killing to remove the problem. But we always like to try to start with the things up at top first. And if we're at the point where our only solution is to reduce population, it's going to be a never-ending story. Did I skip one? No. Nope. It's all you, or is it me?
This you, yeah.
All right. So some of the hazards that we know that we are dealing with are listed here. Lots of human illnesses here that nobody really wants to have, right? And the other part of all this is product loss, as Nobi clearly indicated. There's direct revenue loss there. There's also labor involved in sorting and culling, the sort of burden of figuring out what's been bitten, what hasn't. Is this worth saving? Can I cut parts off and use for a secondary market? So obviously prevention is a key tool to be used here. I also did want to highlight relevance to the produce safety rule. I know not everybody is going to be covered by the produce safety rule, and maybe not even all crops of importance to you that are suffering from rat damage are covered by the rule. But there are relevant sections in the wildlife area, 112.83, harvesting, and doing a pre-harvest assessment in 112.112. And then finally in buildings and construction of buildings to prevent incursion. So there's some really direct federal rule relevance here, and just wanted to point that out. And for anybody looking for supplemental material for PSA trainings, for example, this is where some of this material might fit.
Yeah, this one's you, and then I have the one after.
Okay, thanks. So a little bit about what we know about rats. They actually have fairly limited vision, and that is only important because it means they depend on other things more. And that's some of our secret weapon here. They communicate through pheromones, smell, through odors. And so you'll learn later on that one of the things we can do is disrupt that communication by disrupting the odors and practicing good hygiene and sanitary cleaning. They communicate through sound. They hear noises at higher frequency. They have incredibly evolved teeth that are super strong and can do a lot of damage. If anybody's seen any rat damage that's particularly impressive, go and throw it in the chat. I'd love to hear what you've seen. I've seen some pretty amazing stuff. Here's one of the really key physiological features of rats and other rodents, and actually cats and dogs as well, I learned. They're called vibrissae, and it's the guard hairs right up on the top above their eyes and on their forehead. And that's something that's used for them to navigate and feel their environment and sense their environment. And it brings them comfort when they feel something against that. So keep that in mind. What brings this animal comfort is feeling enclosed a little bit. So when they're in contact with something, it brings them comfort. It signals that they have cover, which is safety to the rat. And it lets them know this is a place I can dig and I can make a home and I can eat. And those are things we want to disrupt. So it's a key component of making rats uncomfortable is disrupting that contact between vibrissae and the rest of the world. So think big open spaces, danger to a rat. Cover, cool. So this is one of the things we're going to really exploit.
Mhm. Yeah, so in the chat box, I'd love to hear from you. We already heard about these burrows, right? So like, what are other active rat signs? How do you know if you have rats or other rodents in an area? What are some indicators? If you can put it in the chat box, that would be great. Yes. That's always, yeah, big chunks. Oh, yes. Wires being chewed up. We'll have a great photo in next upcoming slides. Well, actually, I think we just showed that photo, right, Chris? The wire before. Yep. So as you can see those wonderful chew marks. Yep. Zooming in there. Anything else? Any other indicators that you would think of that tell you that you have rats gnawing on the edge of the wax boxes? Yep. Gnawing. Yeah. Okay, great. So we can go ahead and, yeah, so somebody mentioned poop, right? So droppings, scat is definitely a very obvious sign that you have a pretty bad rat infestation. Sightings, and you'll most likely see them at night. Fresh tracks, active runways, active burrows. So that photo there of the burrow system. And then another indicator is that sebum, which is like sort of an oil that is secreted, and it can be sort of dark, like a black color. So those rub marks can also be indicators that you have rats in the area. And again, we mentioned the pheromone communication, so we'll give some strategies for how to combat that. And so if looking at sort of the principles of integrated pest management, right, you want to aim to disrupt this triangle of life. So they consume around 1 to 2 ounces of food per day. So if they have the right food, then that's where they want to stay, right? If they have shelter and water, then great, that's where they're going to make their home. So making these things as uncomfortable as possible, like we mentioned, burrow harassment is something that we'll keep advocating. So either getting rid of the burrows and like essentially trying to collapse them is a really great strategy. And then constructing to exclude, which we'll talk about different construction methods. And then really looking at the root cause, all these 3 different factors, food, water, and shelter, to reducing populations as opposed to trying to deal with things on the tail end, really get to the root cause of what's increasing the population, right? So prevention is really, really key. Prevention, observation, taking a look at these burrow systems and kind of the developments of what's happening. Intervention, kind of negotiating if you're gonna eventually do a chemical or non-chemical approach. And then evaluation, kind of understanding what's working and what's not, which approaches were more successful than others. So again, removing attractions. So I mentioned that the communication with the pheromones to disrupt these pheromone trails using a 1 part bleach and 10 parts water solution is great for cleaning and sanitizing, because anything that helps break up these pathways of communication, right? Sweeping and removing food, sanitizing to disrupt these odor trails, like I mentioned, separating compost piles and coal piles from produce handling storage areas. In general, when you're feeding a pigeon, you're also providing food that may be used to feed rat population as well. So being mindful of that, keeping sidewalks clean. Oftentimes, I live in Manhattan, and I see folks always cleaning sidewalks. And that's part of their strategy, is just making sure that they're disrupting those pheromone trails. And then keeping animal feed in a sealed metal container away from produce handling and storage areas. We'll talk about that a bit in the next slide as well.
So in this picture here on this slide, just, what do you think is happening here? I mean, not just the nastiness, but what led to the nastiness here? And I'm hoping you can see it if I zoom in. There's enough clarity in the photo so that you know that that's dog kibble. So what do you think the backstory is? Drop that in the chat box. There's no right answer. It's just an exercise of creativity. Dog bowl in the pack house. Good idea. Dog got sick. Possibly rat is storing food, improper storage of kibble on the floor. Yeah, so probably an open feed, opportunity for the dog or dogs that the rat has, or rats have become aware of and taken advantage of. And this is, I believe this is on a shelving unit. So there were probably boxes here. So they had some beautiful cover to carry the food back to and just chow down and then make a mess.
Yeah. I want to make a note too. I mentioned compost piles. So a compost pile that's primarily made up of garden scraps won't necessarily sustain a rat population. A lot of times, it'll be like other non-vegetarian additions that will essentially attract a rodent population. So keeping that in mind and having rules in place and policies for what to add in the compost pile and whatnot, and proper management of that pile. So that's all part of reducing populations as well. Next slide.
Real quick, Yolanda, I think Yolanda and I both have benefited from attending RAD Academy, which is a training opportunity put on by New York City Department of Health. One of the points they made, which I think Nobi made as well, by talking about your surrounding environment in your neighborhood, is your rat is everybody else's rat, and everybody else's rat is your rat. And that hadn't really been articulated for me until I went to that training. You tend to think about, well, but I've done everything I'm supposed to do. I should be cool. But, to Yolanda's point, if somebody else has an attraction next door to you, or somebody else isn't doing the same harassment to make them uncomfortable, it's a neighborhood problem. It's a community problem. So that's something to keep in mind as well, and can be a community solution. So
right. And something to keep in mind too, if you're trying to gauge whether, if you are going to hire a professional, they're kind of only looking at, a targeted section of your farm or garden, and not looking at the bigger picture of like what else is causing this high population. So kind of having a big picture perspective is important too. Yeah.
Great.
So in the chat box, if you're a rat, which of these feed storage approaches is easier for you to access? The left or the right? Bag or the can? Yeah. So as you can see, like having, obviously it'd be harder to nibble your way through the feed in the metal can, as opposed to that, what is that, a plastic bag. So being mindful of how you're storing feed is really important. I have seen, I've walked along and I've seen garbage cans that are sort of like tied down by chains, and they have different mechanisms to keep them closed. They're aware that rats are an issue, and they're trying to disrupt that cycle of life and remove the food. So that's all part of making it uncomfortable.
Yeah, and this example is pretty clear and pretty simple, but it is it relates to any diversified farm that's doing both produce and maybe some livestock or layers, poultry, meat, birds, etc. And it's not something that we necessarily stumble on because you're buying enough feed where you're not going to necessarily notice that it's being taken. But thinking about it now as an attractant, oh, maybe we should have that in a covered, sealed container, right? So it's just meant to provide a lens for thinking about what are the other attractants that might be here other than the food I'm growing.
Yeah. This one's you.
Okay, thanks, Yolanda. So we talked about another best practice being making them feel uncomfortable, and really the idea of burrow harassment was introduced to me by the RAD Academy as well, which I think is a really neat way of thinking about it. And that is, going and collapsing the burrows, filling them in with rocks, which if they're in your sweet potatoes, you may need to find an alternate approach to dealing with the burrows, and so maybe it's tillage or cultivation or something. But first and foremost, reducing cover and harborage areas. When I look around most produce farms I work with, there's a lot of cover, and there are a lot of harborage areas, close to production areas, close to pack houses. Farms are basically a series of piles of stuff, oftentimes, and so we're giving rats shelter and cover and harborage. So, what are some examples of cover that you would see on a farm? So think like a rat. What's going to be comfortable for you? There's one that just jumps right out that we use all the time. That's perfectly sized. If you think about that 1/2 inch to 4 inch space. So drop some examples of cover. How's old row cover? Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Caitlin, ding, ding, ding. Pallets. Yeah. Wood pallets. And they're so useful.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not saying don't use wood pallets. They have a lot of great uses. Great for keeping stuff off the ground, off the wash pack floor. But thinking about how we use pallets, and maybe don't butt them up right against a wall, and maybe make sure they're more than 6 inches from the wall so that we don't give the rat, a comfortable spot all the way around the pallet. Because the pallet itself provides some cover, but if you give it then a runway to get in or out of a building, even worse. Yeah, wood pallets, piles of irrigation pipe, things like that. So are we saying can't have piles of irrigation pipe, can't have pallets? No, but thinking about where are they relative to what you're trying to protect, and thinking about what we can do to make them less hospitable as cover for the rats. So gaps between 1/2 inch and 4 inches are super cozy for these animals. Again, it's the vibrissae. Anything that keeps those in contact with something is going to be really comforting. So try to disrupt that. And I realize we have limited real estate, but do what you can. Moving pallets off the wall, and then doing burrow harassment. It seems like it is endless because they are so active, but we can make a difference by collapsing those burrows. I also learned that every one active burrow has 3 entrances. And so if you find one, look for 2 more, collapse them all, work in 3s, and just try to knock them all down.
Yeah.
Anything to add there, Yolanda?
No, I think that covered it.
All right, here's a high tunnel example. Looking at these 2 examples of high tunnels, what would make a rat comfortable in one or uncomfortable in one? Just looking at what we got going on here. I can hear everybody typing. It's great. Mowed grass, uncomfortable. Right. Look at that big wide open area. To Nobi's earlier point, if I were a bird of prey, raptor, I'd be hanging out near here, man, because I can keep an eye on everything and find what might be running there, which means that the rats aren't going to be running there. If you got kudzu growing nearby, if you've got unmowed grass up against the baseboard, that's a pretty nice safe area for rats to chill out and do damage to your crops. Okay, I think this is me as well. So another best practice is constructing and maintaining structures to exclude rodents. And so a lot of times this comes down to repairing cracks and openings. As Yolanda pointed out earlier, if you know you have, I mean, we know that these the rub marks or sebum is an indicator that we've got a rat population. So when you see that, it's both an indicator of a rat population, but also super intel, that's where they move. That's where they go into and out of some place. So that's a place to focus some attention. Closing up that opening is going to make it much more much less attractive a place to go. And so the way to do that is minimize those entrances, fill them with wire mesh, and then pack them over with whatever the material might be that the wall's made out of. Wire mesh and concrete, although the rat's teeth can get through these materials, sometimes what we're looking for is just make it less fun for them to do it, or less easy. Like if they have something they have to get through to get to the food source, that's better than nothing. So use of curbs is another one. If you have the luxury of doing some new construction, planning to include a curb, which is a section of concrete above the floor, basically a perimeter wall that's up 6 to 6 inches or so, can really make a huge difference. We anecdotally, having worked with a number of farms that built in curbing around their new wash pack, it helps to at least focus any traffic there is, so you can see if you have a problem and address it more locally. And then regularly inspecting, again, the IPM practice, regularly inspecting common points of entry to see if you're providing an opportunity for rodents to get in, piping through the walls, the doorways, windows, corners, and vents. So some ways to do this, again, in new construction, is using something called hardware cloth or wire mesh that actually gets installed at all corners. So down at the floor, if you're building above a first floor, you'd want it on the bottom side of the floor decking as well. So putting this wire mesh in the corners of the framing before you put the finished surface on. This is something I was introduced to at an orchard that was doing its first renovation of its storage building in 100 years. And they took the 100-year-old finished surface off, and behind it, lo and behold, was cork insulation, very cool, but also wire mesh. And so that wire mesh had been in that storage room that entire time, and they just had no issues with rodent pressure in the storage space. So this is an old practice that I think is something we should continue doing. So more on using wire mesh. This is what it actually looks like in practice. You can see, if I zoom in a bit, you can see a rodent hole right here. So this is a sign that we had some population, and this is where they were moving. And so this is wire mesh going up between a sill plate and the floor decking. And then on top of it, we insulated. So this is doing two things at once, excluding the rodent from coming in, and then actually ended up insulating to improve the thermal envelope for the building. This is a great example of a rat-proof growing structure that might work for some smaller scale growers, or it's a modular type thing that Yolanda caught a picture of, and we'll zoom in here a little bit. And maybe Yolanda, you can. I know I'm supposed to do this, but I think you know it better. So
yeah, sure. So this is actually in Flint, Michigan. That's where Flint is, right?
Yep.
And so as you can notice, it's raised off the ground. It's lined with mesh, and also on the surrounded by mesh. So it just makes it hard for rats to get through, right? And in general, this information came from, it was the partnership between New York City Parks Department, Green Thumb, and also the Department of Health in New York City. But some of the things that we say here are to dig out areas where rats used to live about 10 inches or more deep. Again, lay down this metal mesh or fabric, and then fill the top with either gravel or another type of construction filler. So different things to kind of, different layers of materials to kind of make it as difficult as possible to access.
Thanks, Yolanda.
Mhm.
And then our final best practice, reducing population. Sorry, Yolanda, is this yours or mine?
Oh, this is yours.
Okay, cool. So, you know, there are sort of the tried and true methods of baiting and trapping. There are other ways that we're becoming more familiar with, such as gassing using carbon monoxide, and there's also dry ice resulting in carbon dioxide. And so carbon monoxide is a poison, and it binds to the lungs the way oxygen does, and so it asphyxiates the animal in a relatively peaceful way. And carbon dioxide kind of does the same thing. When thinking about rodenticides, such as the green bait in the upper right-hand corner, do keep in mind the food chain. One of the big concerns there is you kill a rat, it becomes food for a scavenger, and what happens to that scavenger? Or it becomes food for a pet, and what happens to that pet? So, and the other thing to keep in mind is sometimes when using baits and in particular rodenticide, think about where you're putting that, because that can become an attractant. So we don't want it in the food area, in the food handling areas. We don't want it in food production areas, and we don't really want it near doorways. We want it somewhere further away so that it doesn't become part of the problem. The other thing that is worth noting here is it may well, if you have a real rodent problem, it probably makes sense to consult a professional exterminator if you get to this point. And chances are, if you have a large problem, it's going to get to this point. Because the other practices we're talking about are going to be difficult to do if you have an extreme population you're dealing with. Also, there are likely local and certifying agency rules. Certainly for organic certification, there are going to be restrictions on what you can use. This is unlikely to work without the other practices, and the other practices are unlikely to work without this.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, it's a good point.
Let's talk about cats. I've learned to love them because I'm married to a cat lover. But beyond that, what about cats for rodent control? What's the upside? What's the downside? What are we worried about with cats? Thank you, Caitlin.
Mm-hmm.
Toxoplasmosis is the big one. And the tricky part of this is it's parasite. So no, I'm all for catch and release and improving the health of the cats. Unfortunately, it's not going to address that risk, because this one is something they pick up from the environment and they shed to the environment. And that's the big one. The other thing is they're super unreliable, because one cat might be an awesome mouser and rat killer. The next one won't be. And so I love them as much as anybody else. I think they really have no place in produce production area or handling area, because they do introduce pretty significant risk. So that's my take on it. And I think at the moment it's going to be the take on any inspection official as well.
I also think they're really misleading. A lot of people think that they can solve their rat problem if they have cats. And oftentimes the cats are just overwhelmed by the population. A female rat can have about 12, in their litter per year. So if your population is just kind of exploding and expanding exponentially, they're not going to catch them all, So, and also by feeding the cats, you're also feeding the rats as well. So being aware of that, I think, is important, because it often is misleading. You think that you're taking care of one problem by keeping the population of another animal on site. So just wanted to plug.
Thank you, Yolanda. I'm dropping a quick link to a resource that Phil Tocco from Michigan State and I put together as well on to learn more about cats on relative to produce. There are a lot of factors there.
Yeah. I was doing some reading that the average cat may only take down a rat once every couple of days, you know, so that it's not their only mission in life. So keeping that in mind, I think is important. We did mention this RAD Academy. It's a pretty extensive training. It's about 2 or 3 hours, and it covers a lot of what we covered in this session. But you're able to ask questions and there are further details. So there were 2 that just happened. There was one that was yesterday, but they're ongoing. And they're for community members, property managers, local businesses, and gardeners. Here in New York City, the New York City Parks Department, I mentioned, Green Thumb, sometimes hosts specific workshops with RAD Academy that focus on gardeners, and that's where a lot of this information came from. So, next. And then the other, go ahead.
Chris, sorry, y'all. Holy smokes, this has been good. We got about a minute left, so you might want to just go to the last slide so folks can get your contact information and the other resources.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so we also were going to just talk about signs and the importance of signage and communicating your policies and procedures and this RAD portal. So that was, but I can put that in the link too. That last site has a lot of really great information on reducing rat populations. And I can put my email address in the chat box.
I'll do the same. Thanks, y'all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Chris, Yolanda, Nobi, thanks y'all so much. There may or may not be an evaluation link popping into the chat box at the last minute because this is generously supported by the FDA and we love to get y'all's feedback so that we can always be improving. Nobi, I'm happy to talk more about chewed on sweet potatoes off video. Certainly a relief to not have to answer that question video. And then with that, yeah, I just want to say thanks again to our participants. Thanks again to our attendees. And I look forward to seeing all of y'all at our next Stories from the Field webinar. And Nicole, you're more than welcome to stop transcribing at this point. Thanks, y'all. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everybody.